Welcome to the Painting Coach, and in this video we are going to be painting the brand new Vespids from Kill Team Hivestorm. A huge thank you to Games Workshop for sending me the box out early so I can get cracking on all this content. Now this one is a nice, simple and straightforward one, but I think it's quite effective as well, so let's get painting. First up, I've primed everything in Wraithbone, so we've got a nice bright undercoat to get cracking with, and that probably gives you a clue how we're going to do this. First up, we're going to take some Magmadroth Flame and paint this over all the areas that we want to be orange, and this is going to serve as our base coat. Generally, we want to be fairly careful with this because there are some areas we don't want to get it, such as on the wing membranes and also on that soft fleshy area under the tail. If we get any of it on the weapons or any of the other areas that are going to be black later on, that's not a massive issue. Once that's completely dry, we've got a very nice orange base coat, so it's time to shade it down a little bit so we can get a little bit of differentiation across all of that exoskeleton. To do this, I'm going to mix a 3-to-1 mix, 3 parts contrast medium to 1 part flesh tearers red. And then what I'm going to do is paint this across those areas that I want to be darker. Now, we're generally looking at the extremities, so we're looking at the bottom of the feet, the shoulders, the hands. Just check the box out if you're not 100% sure. Now, this technique's really easy. All we're going to do is paint it on where we want it, then we're going to clean our brush and just feather the end of it into the orange a little bit, and that's going to give us a nice transition to some darker red areas. If you feel you need to have it darker, then you can always put a second coat of this mix on closer to where you want that shadow. Next up, I'm going to paint all of the black areas, and I'm going to use Black Legion contrast paint for this. Now, there aren't many areas on the model, and you will have to be careful not to spill it on parts you've already finished. So in terms of the leader of the Vespids, we're looking at the claws, we're looking at the mandibles on the face, and we're also going to be looking at some of the Tau tech. So, for instance, we've got the magazine or the barrel for this weapon, we've also got the handle and the stock, and we've got an aerial coming out at the top of his head as well. And I did forget to do it now, but I will do it later. There's that aerial on the back as well on that control node. So with that done and completely dry, it's time to start highlighting, and this is where the model's really going to come to life. So I'm going to take some Wild Rider Red to start with, and this is a very orangey red, and I'm looking to start highlighting in particular the parts that we've shaded with that Flesh Tearers red. And generally I'm looking to drag the brush along the sharp sections. I'm looking to stipple where I've got some nice volumetric highlights, such as on the, I guess you'd call it the knee area, but I am also looking to catch the sharp edges on things like the hand. And where we've got these little growths and wicks coming out of the hands and the other fleshy areas, we're going to paint them as well. We'll move on to Trollslayer Orange next, and generally I want to paint this inside the Wild Rider Red from the previous step. So where I can, I'm going to drag the brush along those sharp edges to get some nice crisp highlights. And I'm also going to stipple it around those nice volumetric areas as well. Now, that's the only bit of highlighting we're really going to do on the darker red areas. We're also going to use the Trollslayer Orange across the rest of the exoskeleton, because this is the first highlight for those areas, and we're going to go a little bit brighter as we work our way up through the highlights. And generally for this, you can drag it along the sharp part of the miniature, and you get a really nice crisp highlight by doing so. The next highlight is with Fire Dragon Bright, and we're focusing this only on that orange part of the exoskeleton. Now again, because it's quite sharp, we can drag it along those sharp edges to get those nice crisp highlights. Where we have got those growths coming out of the darker red areas, we will drag the brush along them just to highlight them a bit as well. And in some areas, you will need to just make sure you've got a sharp tip on your brush and just draw some really nice thin highlights inside the Trollslayer Orange from the previous stage. The final orange highlight is with Lugganath Orange. And again, what I'm looking to do here is make sure I haven't got too much on my brush. I'm looking to drag it along those sharp areas to get a nice bright highlight. Now this is really the last true edge highlight as well. We're not doing any area highlights with this. We are just picking out those really sharp edges of the exoskeleton to make them pop. And if you do make any mistakes, you can always go back in with the colour you've used previously to fix it. We'll paint the wing membranes next. I wanted a nice contrasting colour, so I'm going for green. Now if you need to, take some Wraithbone to fix any mistakes you may have made or spillages with the orange, and then take a 1-to-1 mix of contrast medium and Kroak Green, which is a wash, and just paint this all over the wing membrane. Now, this is going to be very thin. You don't want it to settle too heavily, so just keep an eye on it as it dries. When it's completely dry, add a second coat of the same mix on. Again, making sure it doesn't dry too heavily. The reason I've gone for 2 thinner coats rather than 1 thick coat is I wasn't quite sure how the Kroak Green was going to react. And I think with this, it just gives me a little bit more control. If you want to add some mottling on there, you can stipple it across the membranes as well. Just to pick out some of the spines on those membranes, I'm going to take a little bit of Wraithbone and just drag it along the sharp raised section. I'm also going to drag it around the bottom edges as well, just to give them a little bit of a brighter highlight. Now for the underbelly on the tail, I'm going to show you on a different miniature, and I'm going to show you this in real time. Okay, so I'm not going to do any cuts across this. This is exactly how I did it. Take some Gryph-hound Orange contrast paint, which is slightly darker than the Magmadroth Flame that we used right at the start, and just paint it along the edges of both sides of the tail. Now, you're going to work fairly quickly here, so then clean your brush off, dip it in some contrast medium, and then paint it across the whole area of that fleshy part of the tail. And what you'll see is it thins it on the miniature and flows really nicely into those recesses, giving you a really quick and easy step to this painting process. I'm going to start highlighting all of the black next, so we're looking at the parts on the weapon, the mandibles, and all of the claws. And the first highlight we're going to do with this is Eshin Grey. Now, when it comes to these areas, I'm going to paint the majority of them with the Eshin Grey, leaving that black legion in the recesses. And this is going to give me, again, a fairly nice area highlight. Next up, we'll do a highlight with some Dawnstone. And we're looking to do more of an edge highlight for this. Now, on the canister on the weapon, I do continue with that area highlight a little bit. But generally for the claws, I'm looking to just catch the sharpest parts. To finish up the highlighting on the black, I'm going to take a little bit of Grey Seer. Now, generally what I'm looking to do with the Grey Seer is just put little dot highlights on the sharpest parts to just give the impression that there's a really pointed bit of light on there, because the area is so sharp it's catching a nice reflection. Use this really sparingly. Next up, we've got all the white Tau tech. Now, you don't have to paint it white, but I've decided to. So I'm going to take some Corax White. Yes, I know, I do actually quite like it. I'm going to base all of those areas. Now, generally, this will go down in one coat. Where you've made some mistakes and spillages, you may need a couple of coats to cover it up. So on the leader, obviously, I've got the helmet, I've got the weapon, and I've got the tracker and control unit on the back as well. So for the other Vespids, you may only have the weapon and the control piece on the back, but just make sure you get a nice even coat. I'm then going to wash all of these areas using Soulblight Grey. Now, this needs a really good shake, so make sure you do that. And the other thing to be really, really careful with is not to spill it on bits you've finished, because the Soulblight Grey will actually stain other areas as well. So make sure you just keep it on those white parts. Now, unfortunately, that Soulblight Grey was a little too dark across some of the white areas, so I'm just going back in with some Corax White just to brighten them up a little bit before we start highlighting. To highlight everything, I'm using white from AK. Now, you can use whatever white that you've got. If you've got white scar, that's absolutely fine. Any bright white will do. Generally, I look to drag my brush across sharp edges that are going to catch the most light. This will give me a nice crisp highlight. Where I can't do this, I'm just going to very carefully paint along the lines, leaving that Soulblight Grey in the recesses. I'm also going to paint the crystal and any lenses with the bright white as well. For the lenses on the helmet, I'm going to paint them with Aethermatic Blue. Now, I'm just going to paint this over them, then I'm going to clean my brush off, and then I'm going to put the brush back onto the paint while it's still wet to suck away any excess, and this should leave me with a lighter spot in the middle that looks a little bit like a glow. For the crystal, I'm going to paint the front half of it with Striking Scorpion contrast paint, and then while that's still wet, I'm going to use Karandras Green to paint the back half of it, and this will flow into the Striking Scorpion, and it'll give me a really nice and simple glowy crystal effect for very, very little effort. The only metallic part of this model is that gyro in the middle of the weapon, so we're going to base that using Dragon's Gold. Again, there's hardly any gold on the model, but we need to do it. We'll then shade it with some Reikland Fleshshade. The key thing here is just being careful not to make a mess on the white areas and to just keep it into those recesses. We'll then finish that up using some glistening gold. Now, you can use Liberator Gold if that's what you've got. Again, very sparingly. And there we have it. This Vespid is done and ready for the Kill Team tabletop. And it shouldn't take you too long to paint the rest of the Kill Team using this technique. This went really, really quickly. I think the result is quite effective. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like and a comment down below. I really appreciate all your interactions and hearing all your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.